James Ambrose Johnson Jr., better known as Rick James, was born on February 1st, 1948. He was renowned for being a singer and musician that was born in Buffalo, New York. His father was an auto worker that left the family when he was 10 years old, and his mother resorted to working as a numbers runner to make money. James's mother would take him with her on her routes, where he would see famous musicians playing in bars. James claimed that he lost his virginity at the age of 9 or 10 to a 14-year-old girl, claiming that his kinky nature came in early. He was introduced to drugs at an early age and was busted for burglary as a young teen. At the age of 14 or 15, James entered the U.S. Navy to avoid being drafted into the Army. James ended up missing his twice-a-month reserve sessions and ended up being ordered to Vietnam. Rick left the States and went to Toronto, Canada. While there, he made friends with Neil Young and Joni Mitchell and went by the name Ricky James Matthews to avoid being caught by the military. In 1964, he formed the Minor Birds, to which they recorded at the Canadian division of Columbia Records in 1965. Sometime in 1968, James got into pimping briefly, but stopped as he felt like he was not qualified due to the harsh activity and abuse of women there. Also during this time, James formed various iterations of the band Salt and Pepper, even gaining an investment from Jay Sebring. According to Rick James, Sebring invited him to attend a party at Sharon Tate's house, but he was too hungover to get out of bed. The next morning, James found out that Jay Sebring and the others at Cielo Drive had been murdered on August 9th, 1969. James went solo in his career on 1973, and in 1978 he released the album Come Get It that had the hit single Mary Jane. The album sold 2 million copies, which launched his career. Come 1989, his career started to lose strength, and he began struggling with legal and personal problems in 1990. In 1989, James met Tanya Hijazi, who is described as having been a 17-year-old partygoer. The two started dating in 1990 and welcomed their only child in 1993. They married in 1996 and then divorced in 2002. On August 2nd, 1991, James and Tanya were arrested on the charges of holding 24-year-old Frances Alley hostage for 6 days, though some sources state that it was 2 or 3 days. They tied her up, forcing her to perform sexual acts, and burned her legs and abdomen with the hot end of a crack pipe and a heated knife during a week-long coke binge. James's bail was $1 million, and Tanya's was $500,000. Frances Alley had met James at his house on July 16th of that year. She initially went to his house as she was a friend. One source states that the couple offered to put her up at their house, but James accused Alley of taking drugs from his home and held her against her will, also threatening her with a gun. James released her, initially telling her not to tell anybody. Alley went to Cedars-Sinai to be treated for her injuries. Deputy District Attorney Myron Jenkins had stated that the burns left on her body left horrendous scars. Alley suffered 20 burns in total, and her injuries led the hospital's staff to notify the police. James faced a sentence of life in prison if he were convicted on all charges, which included assault with a deadly weapon, aggravated mayhem, torture, forcible oral copulation, false imprisonment, and kidnapping. The case went to trial in 1993, where James pled innocent. The trial only lasted 3 weeks long, and at one point, he cried while testifying, asking the judge for a weekend release so that he could marry his girlfriend Tanya, of which it was denied. Tanya pled guilty to the assault charge, and the rest were dropped for her. She served 15 months. James, on the other hand, was convicted on the assault, imprisonment, and drug charges, and was sentenced to 5 years and 4 months in prison. He was sent to Folsom State Prison in California, where apparently he created more than 300 songs. James is quoted as saying, "Prison has been a blessing in disguise. Otherwise, I probably would have been dead by now." He served 2 years in prison and was released in 1996. In a 1997 interview, James stated that the kidnapping and torture never happened. He said, "I mean, here's a girl who had a pimp, who feels that they could get some money out of Rick James so they could support their habit. So that's how that happened." On August 6, 2004, James passed away in his Los Angeles home. He died of pulmonary and cardiac failure. He's buried in Forest Lawn Cemetery in Buffalo, New York.